Picture yourself standing alone in the Elden Throne Room, that vast chamber where golden light filters through fractured stained glass, casting long shadows across ancient stone. The silence here isn't peaceful. It's pregnant with something unseen, something watching. You've defeated demigods, shattered the greatest warriors of this age, claimed great runes that pulse with divine power, yet here, at the precipice of godhood itself, you feel impossibly small. Because what you're beginning to understand, what the game has been whispering to you through item descriptions and cryptic dialogue, through environmental storytelling and half-remembered legends, is that everything you've witnessed, every tragedy, every triumph, every moment of this epic journey has been orchestrated by forces so far beyond mortal comprehension that even the demigods themselves are merely pawns on a cosmic board. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we're pulling back the veil on perhaps the most disturbing truth in all of Elden Ring, the Outer Gods. These aren't your typical deities sitting on golden thrones dispensing wisdom and judgment. No, these are formless, incomprehensible entities existing beyond the boundaries of physical reality, puppet masters pulling strings attached to the very fabric of existence itself. They're the cosmic horror lurking behind From Software's dark fantasy, the writhing tentacles beneath the beautiful facade of the Erdtree's golden grace. Think about what you've experienced in the lands between. Malenia, rotting from within yet blooming into something terrifyingly beautiful. Morg, drowning in blood while whispering to an absent mother. The merchants, buried alive beneath Lendl, their collective anguish birthing yellow chaos flame. Each of these horrors, each of these tragedies, represents the touch of an outer god. Entities that cannot manifest physically in our world, but desperately seek vessels, champions, and believers to enact their incomprehensible will upon reality. The brilliance of Elden Ring's cosmic horror lies not in what it shows you, but in what it implies. You never see these gods directly. You can't. Your mind literally couldn't process their true forms. Instead, you witness their influence like seeing the shadow of something massive moving beneath ice. You know it's there. You can trace its movements through the cracks and distortions it creates, but the thing itself remains mercifully hidden from view. This is pure, Lovecraftian storytelling adapted to interactive media, where the player becomes both investigator and potential vessel for these otherworldly powers. What makes the Outer Gods particularly fascinating and genuinely unsettling is how they've shaped literally everything you encounter in your journey. The Golden Order that seems so absolute, so divinely mandated. That's just one Outer God's vision of reality, imposed through violence and faith. The Scarlet Rat consuming Caelid? Another god's influence, sealed away by a legendary swordsman but still seeping through the cracks like poison through gauze. The blood rituals performed in hidden catacombs, the madness spreading through yellow flame, the cold darkness of the moon. Each represents a different cosmic entity vying for control, for worship, for the chance to reshape existence according to their alien desires. Understanding the Outer Gods fundamentally changes how you interpret Elden Ring's narrative. Suddenly, the shattering isn't just a war between ambitious demigods, it's a proxy conflict between cosmic forces using Marika's children as weapons. The Tarnished aren't simply undead warriors called back to restore order. They're potential vessels being tested, groomed, and manipulated by entities playing a game whose rules we can barely comprehend. Let me paint you a clearer picture of what we're dealing with here. According to confirmed in-game lore, these Outer Gods exist as formless entities that cannot directly manifest within the lands between. They're described in various item descriptions and character dialogues as beings of pure concept ideas, giving cosmic weight and terrible purpose. The formless mother craves wounds, not metaphorically but as a fundamental aspect of her existence. The god of Scarlet Rot doesn't just spread disease, it is decay itself, entropy given consciousness and hunger. The frenzied flame seeks to melt all existence back into primordial oneness, to undo the very concept of distinction and individuality. What's particularly clever about From Software's approach is how they've made these incomprehensible beings feel both alien and intimately connected to human experience. Each outer god represents an extreme interpretation of concepts we understand: order, chaos, decay, blood, darkness, pushed to cosmic absolutes. The greater will doesn't just prefer order, it demands absolute systematic control over all existence. The dark moon doesn't simply represent mystery, it embodies the cold, distant unknown that will outlive all warmth and light. These entities require intermediaries to interact with the physical world, and this is where the true tragedy of Elden Ring reveals itself. Empyrean's beings born with the potential to become vessels for outer gods don't choose their fate. Malenia didn't ask to be cursed with rot from birth. Miquella didn't request eternal youth that made him vulnerable to exploitation. These individuals, powerful as they seem, are ultimately victims of cosmic forces that view them as nothing more than tools, containers for divine will that cares nothing for human suffering or mortal concerns. The game tells us through various sources that Empyreans are special beings who can commune with outer gods, though whether they're born this way or chosen remains deliberately ambiguous. What we do know from confirmed lore is that Queen Marika herself was an Empyrean who became vessel to the greater will, establishing the golden order that would dominate the lands between for age upon age. Her children, at least some of them, inherited this terrible potential. Ranni, Malenia, and Miquella are all confirmed. Empyreans, each courted or cursed by different outer gods. But it's not just Empyreans who serve as conduits for these cosmic powers. The game shows us various envoys and avatars, the two fingers serving the greater will, the three fingers channeling the frenzied flame, the twin bird that once served as envoy for an outer god of death. These beings act as interpreters, translators of cosmic will into forms that mortal minds can somewhat grasp, though even these interpretations often drive men mad. Consider the two fingers for a moment. Throughout your journey, these bizarre entities are presented as divine guides, interpreters of the greater will's design. Finger readers spend their entire lives learning to understand the twitching, gesturing movements of these alien appendages. Yet what we discover through Ranni's questline and various hidden lore completely recontextualizes their nature. The two fingers aren't infallible conduits of divine wisdom. They're essentially cosmic telephone lines, and, as we learn, the connection has been severed. They gesture frantically not because they're receiving divine wisdom, but because they're desperately trying to re-establish contact with a distant god that may have abandoned them entirely. This brings us to one of the most disturbing truths about the outer gods. They're not omnipotent, and they're certainly not omniscient. They're limited by their need for physical vessels and interpreters. They wage war against each other using mortals as proxies. They can be sealed away, as happened with the god of rot. They can be defied, as Ranni demonstrates with her elaborate plan to kill her, two fingers and forge a new path. These aren't the all-powerful deities of classical mythology. They're more like cosmic parasites, immensely powerful but dependent on mortal hosts to enact their will upon physical reality. If you're finding value in unraveling these cosmic mysteries with me, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations into gaming's most intricate narratives possible, and there's so much more darkness to explore together. Now, let's delve into perhaps the most viscerally disturbing of all the confirmed outer gods, the entity sealed beneath the Lake of Rot. This being isn't named directly in the game, referred to only as the God of Rot, or the Scorpion's God in various item descriptions, but its influence permeates one of Elden Ring's most tragic storylines. According to the Scorpion's stinger weapon description and the Blue Dancer charm, this god was once sealed away by a legendary blind swordsman who somehow, impossibly, defeated a deity that was Rot incarnate. The swordsman used a flowing sword technique taught by a fairy. Yes, an actual fairy in the world of Elden Ring, to accomplish what should have been impossible, containing pure entropy itself. But here's where the cosmic horror truly sets in. The seal didn't destroy the god of Rot. You can't destroy a concept, can't kill decay itself. The seal merely contained it, and like all seals, it weakens over time. The god's essence seeped upward, pooling in what would become the Lake of Rot, that nightmarish crimson expanse beneath the earth where the kindred of Rot worshipped their sealed deity in ceremonies of decay and renewal. More disturbingly, this divine Rot found its way into the bloodline of the Lands Between's greatest warriors. Malenia was born cursed, marked by the scarlet rot from her first breath. This wasn't random misfortune or genetic anomaly. This was an outer god claiming a vessel before she could even understand what was happening to her. Every moment of her life became a battle against divine corruption, trying to transform her into something inhuman. The game tells us through multiple sources about the prophecy of three blooms. Each time the scarlet flower blooms, Malenia's rot advances, and with the third bloom, she will become a true goddess, not ascending to divinity through achievement or wisdom, but through complete submission to an alien will that views her body as nothing more than a chrysalis for its resurrection. The tragedy deepens when you consider Miquella's desperate attempts to cure his sister. Here was perhaps the most brilliant mind in the Lands Between, an Empyrean with his own divine potential, spending centuries trying to break a curse that was never really a curse at all. It was a claim of ownership by a god that had been waiting patiently beneath the earth for the perfect vessel to complete its return. Every healing attempt, every moment of hope was doomed from the start because you cannot heal someone from becoming what they were born to be. The Battle of Ionia, where Malenia faced Radahn in single combat, wasn't just a clash between demigods. It was the moment when desperation finally broke through Malenia's iron will. Faced with defeat, she chose to bloom, releasing the scarlet rot that transformed Caelid from a verdant land into a nightmare of fungal growths and rotting earth. The game shows us the aftermath in horrifying detail. Soldiers fused into the ground, their bodies becoming part of the rot's eternal cycle of decay and twisted rebirth. Dogs mutated into creatures barely recognizable as once living things. The sky itself stained red, as if the very air had begun to decompose. But perhaps most disturbing is what we find in the Halictree, where Malenia waits in her final bloom. She's no longer entirely human, no longer entirely herself. The rot has transformed her into something between mortal and god, a goddess of rot who speaks with Malenia's voice, but serves a will not her own. When she introduces herself in that boss fight, "I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella." She's clinging to the last fragment of her identity, the one thing the rot cannot take, her devotion to her brother. Yet even this is tragic. As Miquella himself has been stolen away, his body corrupted by another outer god servant. The kindred of Rot, those beings born from the Lake of Rot itself, worship this sealed god with religious fervor that speaks to one of Elden Ring's most unsettling themes, the willing submission to cosmic horror. These aren't victims like Malenia. They actively seek communion with decay, performing rituals that honor decomposition as a sacred act. The game presents them not as mindless monsters, but as true believers who see beauty in entropy, divinity in decay. They've built an entire theology around rot as transformation, decay as ascension. This brings us to another disturbing player in the cosmic game, the formless mother, the outer god who answered Molg's desperate prayers in the depths beneath Landel. The lore tells us, through various blood incantations and item descriptions, that the formless mother is an outer god who craves wounds. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. She literally desires wounds as openings through which she can touch the world. She's called the Mother of Truth in some texts, suggesting that bloodshed reveals some fundamental reality that the Golden Order tries to hide. Molg's story intertwines with the formless mother in ways that reveal just how predatory these outer gods can be. Cast into the sewers beneath Lendil as an omen, shunned by the Golden Order that his mother Marika supposedly represented, Molg found solace in communion with an entity that valued what made him monstrous. The formless mother didn't cure his omen nature. She celebrated it, transformed it into a source of power rather than shame. Through blood rituals and sacred wounds, Mohg gained abilities that rivaled any demigods, but at what cost? The Mohgwyn dynasty that Mohg envisioned was never really his idea. The game reveals through careful examination of his dialogue and related items that his grand vision of a blood-soaked empire was essentially the formless mother's will expressed through a broken man desperate for purpose and acceptance. He kidnapped Miquella, not out of simple ambition, but because the formless mother needed an Empyrean vessel, and Mohg, in his delusion, believed he could raise Miquella to godhood through blood rituals. Within Mohgwyn Palace, the blood-saturated cocoon represents an attempt to forcibly transform an Empyrean into a vessel for an outer god, a violation so profound it transcends physical horror. What makes this even more tragic is what we learn in the Shadow of the Erdtree content. Miquella had actually charmed Mohg, manipulating him for his own elaborate plan. The Lord of Blood, who thought himself a dynastic founder communing with a goddess of truth, was actually a puppet caught between two different manipulations. One from an outer god who saw him as a useful tool, another from an Empyrean with his own divine ambitions. The blood rituals, the desperate attempts to awaken Miquella, the grand dynasty. All of it was built on lies within lies, manipulation nested inside cosmic horror. The blood fiends we encounter, particularly in the Land of Shadow, show us what happens to those who fully embrace the formless mother's gifts. These beings perform blood rituals that literally set their cursed blood on fire, transforming their bodies into living weapons. They're described in various sources as enriching their accursed blood through these rituals, suggesting that the formless mother's influence doesn't just grant power. It fundamentally changes the nature of blood itself, turning it from life, giving fluid into something alien and hostile to normal existence. But perhaps no outer god represents pure existential horror quite like the frenzied flame. This entity, channeled through the three fingers hidden deep beneath Leyndell, offers the most radical solution to the world's suffering. Burn everything away and return all existence to the primordial oneness from which it came. The game's lore, particularly through Hayata's questline and various madness-related items, reveals that the frenzied flame sees the very act of division, of separate existence, as the fundamental mistake that created all suffering. According to the game's deepest lore, everything that exists came from something called the One Great. Then came fractures, births, souls, distinction itself. The greater will, in creating or enabling this separation, made what the frenzied flame considers an unforgivable error. Every moment of torment, every curse, every sin born from the mistake of allowing separate things to exist. The frenzied flame solution is elegantly horrifying. If separation causes suffering, then the cure is to melt everything back together into one unified whole where suffering becomes impossible because there's no separate consciousness to experience it. The tragedy of the merchants buried beneath Leyndell provides the most human face to this cosmic horror. These people, accused of heresy by the Golden Order, were buried alive in the catacombs beneath the capital. Their collective anguish, their unified despair at such injustice, actually summoned the frenzied flame into the world. Think about that for a moment. Their suffering was so intense, so unified in its hopelessness, that it literally called forth a god dedicated to ending all existence. The game presents this through environmental storytelling that's genuinely disturbing. Countless corpses sitting in positions of prayer or despair, their final moments preserved in stone and shadow. Shabriri, described as the most reviled man in history, had his eyes gouged out for the crime of slander. But here's the disturbing implication. What if his slander was actually truth? What if he saw through the Golden Order's lies and was punished, not for lying, but for revealing something the Order couldn't allow to be known? His spirit became a vessel for the frenzied flame, possessing bodies to spread chaos's gospel. When you meet him wearing Yura's body, he's unnervingly reasonable, presenting the frenzied flame not as destructive madness, but as mercy. A final solution to endless suffering. The Lord of Chaos ending, should you choose to embrace the three fingers, shows us what this philosophy looks like in practice. The world doesn't just burn, it melts. Distinction itself begins to break down. The Erd Tree becomes a beacon of yellow chaos flame, broadcasting the end of separation to all existence. Malena's vow to hunt you down if you choose. This path isn't just about revenge. She understands that you become the herald of absolute ending, the hand that will unmake everything that ever was or could be. What's particularly brilliant about how From Software presents the frenzied flame is that it makes a horrifying amount of sense. In a world of endless war, where gods use mortals as pawns, where children are cursed from birth and entire lands rot from divine influence, is it really madness to want it all to stop? The merchants didn't choose chaos out of evil intent. They embraced it from despair, so complete that non-existence seemed preferable to continued suffering. The frenzied flame offers not just death, but the complete cessation of the possibility of suffering, and in Elden Ring's bleak world, that can seem almost merciful. This brings us to the elephant in the room, or perhaps more accurately, the tree in the sky, the greater will. While never explicitly called an outer god in the game's text, the greater will functions identically to other outer gods, and represents perhaps the most successful cosmic colonization in the game's history. Through its vassals, first Meteor, the Mother of Fingers, then the Elden Beast, the Greater Will established the Golden Order that would dominate the lands between for countless ages. The game reveals through various sources that the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing the Elden Beast to the lands between, which would become the Elden Ring itself. Think about what this means. The fundamental laws of reality in the lands between, the very logic by which life and death operate, are essentially alien programming imposed by an external force. The Golden Order isn't natural law. It's one Outer Gods vision of how reality should function, enforced through divine violence and maintained through religious indoctrination. Queen Marika's role in this cosmic colonization is fascinatingly complex. As an Empyrean, she became the vessel through which the Greater Will could interact with the world. But the game hints through various item descriptions and environmental details that she eventually began to question and ultimately rebel against her divine patron. The shattering wasn't just Marika breaking the Elden Ring in grief over Godwyn's death. It was a vessel rejecting her god, attempting to shatter the very system that gave her power. The two fingers, which players initially encounter as wise guides offering divine direction, are revealed through deeper investigation to be essentially divine middle management, interpreters of a will that might not even be paying attention anymore. The finger readers dedicate their lives to understanding the gestures of these entities, but what they're interpreting might be nothing more than cosmic static, desperate attempts to re-establish contact with a god that has moved on to other projects. The fact that the two fingers need to commune with the Greater Will for thousands of years just to receive new instructions suggests a god so distant, so removed from mortal concerns that even its own servants can barely reach it. The Golden Order's systematic suppression of other faiths and practices reveals the Greater Will as fundamentally totalitarian in nature. The persecution of the Omen, the burial of the merchants, the sealing away of destined death itself. All of these represent attempts to create perfect order by eliminating anything that doesn't fit the prescribed pattern. Those who live in death are hunted not because they're evil, but because their very existence challenges the Golden Order's monopoly on life and death. The Crucible, that primordial force of chaotic evolution, is suppressed because its wild creativity threatens the sterile perfection of golden law. What makes the Greater Will particularly insidious is how it presents its tyranny as benevolence. Grace, that golden light that guides tarnished, seems like divine blessing, but is actually a form of control, directing chosen individuals toward predetermined outcomes. The Erd Tree, beautiful and majestic, is essentially a cosmic parasite feeding on the souls of the dead, recycling them according to alien design. Even the concept of returning to the Erd Tree upon death, presented as a form of immortality or continuation, is really about feeding an alien entity that uses souls as fuel for its ordered reality. The revelation about Metter, Mother of Fingers, in the game's deeper lore adds another layer of cosmic horror. She was the first shooting star sent by the Greater Will, the original herald of its design, yet even she has been abandoned. The 2 fingers and 3 fingers, they're all her children, desperately trying to interpret a divine will that might not even remember they exist. The breakdown between 2 and 3 fingers might represent not philosophical difference but cosmic mental illness, a divine messenger driven mad by abandonment and splitting into contradictory interpretations of absent orders. Now we come to one of the most mysterious yet influential outer gods, the dark moon that young Ranni encountered in her youth. The game tells us through her questline and various items that this entity appeared to her as a cold, dark moon, and this encounter would shape not just her destiny, but potentially the fate of the entire lands between. Unlike other outer gods that demand worship or submission, the dark moon seems to offer something different. Mystery, possibility, and perhaps most importantly, freedom from certainty. Ranni's ending, the Age of Stars, is often misunderstood because of translation ambiguities, but what it represents is radical in the context of outer god influence. Rather than replacing one god's order with another's, Ranni seeks to remove the divine influence from the lands between entirely, taking it into the cold darkness of space where it can no longer directly interfere with mortal lives. She doesn't promise a better order. She promises uncertainty, mystery, a 1,000-year journey into the unknown where mortals must find their own meaning without divine mandate. The marriage between the Golden Order and the Moon, represented by Radagon and Renala's union, created a brief moment where 2 cosmic influences coexisted. But this partnership was doomed from the start, not just because of personal incompatibility, but because these forces represent fundamentally different approaches to existence. The Golden Order demands clarity, definition, absolute truth. The Dark Moon offers obscurity, possibility, questions without guaranteed answers. When Radagon abandoned Renala to become Elden Lord, it wasn't just personal betrayal. It was the Golden Order reasserting its monopolistic control over divine influence. The Carian royal family's connection to the Dark Moon manifests in their sorceries, which draw upon the cold and dark rather than the warm gold of the Erd Tree. Glintstone sorcery itself might be another form of outer god influence, connected to the primeval current and the stellar void. The graven schools that study the stars aren't just practicing astronomy. They're attempting to comprehend cosmic forces that predate and potentially outlast the Golden Order's reign. There are other outer gods whose influence we can trace through the lands between, though their natures remain largely mysterious. The fell god of the fire giants, whose defeat required Marika herself to intervene, represented a divine force of destructive flame that predated the Erd Tree. The fact that the last fire giant must be kept alive, cursed to tend the flame that could destroy the Erd Tree, suggests that even defeated gods cannot be truly killed, only contained, suppressed, their influence minimized but never eliminated. The ancient dragons might have served their own outer god, evidenced by their golden lightning and connection to powers that seem distinct from yet compatible with the Golden Order. The dragon communion practiced by some tarnished literally involves consuming dragon hearts to gain their power, a form of divine cannibalism that transforms the practitioner over time into something inhuman. The game warns through various descriptions that those who partake in dragon communion will eventually lose their humanity entirely, becoming dragons themselves. Another form of divine possession, willing transformation into a vessel for ancient power. What all of these outer gods share, despite their vastly different natures and goals, is a fundamental disregard for mortal agency and well-being. They view the inhabitants of the lands between not as individuals worthy of consideration, but as resources to be utilized, vessels to be filled, or obstacles to be removed. The cosmic war they wage uses entire civilizations as ammunition, turning personal tragedies into strategic advantages and individual souls into currency for divine ambitions. The player's role in this cosmic conflict is perhaps the most disturbing element of all. As a tarnished guided by grace, you're essentially a divine instrument being wielded by forces you barely understand. Every ending represents service to a different outer god or philosophy. Even the default Elden Lord endings simply restore different versions of the Greater Will's order. The game offers no true escape from divine influence, only the choice of which cosmic force you'll empower through your actions. The mending runes you can acquire. Death, perfect order, despair, and the curse. Each represents a different interpretation of how reality should function, but all of them work within the framework established by Outer Gods. You're not creating something new, you're selecting from a menu of pre-existing cosmic options, each with its own horrifying implications for the mortals who must live under your chosen reality. Consider what each ending really means for the average person in the lands between. The Age of Fracture maintains the broken status quo, leaving mortals to suffer under a damaged system. The Age of Perfect Order, created through Goldmask's rune, attempts to remove the possibility of divine betrayal by making the order absolute and unchangeable, essentially turning reality into a crystallized prison where nothing can grow or change. The Age of Despair spreads Dung Eater's curse to all living things, ensuring that everyone suffers equally under a blessing that's actually damnation. The Age of the Duskborn restores, destined death, but also legitimizes those who live in death, fundamentally altering the nature of existence and mortality. Even seemingly heroic choices serve cosmic horror. Helping Millicent means advancing the Scarlet Rot's agenda, whether she blooms or not. Completing Ranni's questline requires multiple murders and betrayals, all to serve a moon goddess whose true intentions remain mysteriously obscured. Every questline, every choice, every action feeds into the cosmic machinery operated by entities that view mortal suffering as, at best, irrelevant and, at worst, entertaining. The environmental storytelling reinforces this cosmic insignificance constantly. The walking mausoleums carry the bodies of soulless demigods, children born without the spark that would make them useful to outer gods, preserved in eternal procession as monuments to divine indifference. The wandering nobles, endlessly seeking the Elden Ring they'll never find, represent mortals caught in loops of divine programming they can't escape. The Jar Warriors, filled with the remains of great warriors, show how even death doesn't free you from being used as a resource in divine conflicts. This cosmic horror extends to the game's fundamental mechanics. The ability to resurrect after death, presented as a blessing of grace, is actually a curse that ensures you'll keep serving divine will regardless of how many times you fail or how much you suffer. The sights of grace that guide your path aren't showing you freedom. They're herding you toward predetermined outcomes that serve cosmic agendas. Even your ability to level up, to grow stronger, comes from channeling runes, fragments of the shattered Elden Ring, making you progressively more divine and less human with every improvement. The true horror of Elden Ring's Outer Gods isn't their alien nature or incomprehensible power. It's the revelation that everything meaningful in the lands between exists only in relation to their influence. Culture, religion, philosophy, even basic concepts like life and death are all shaped by cosmic forces that care nothing for the beings they affect. The mortals of the lands between don't just live under divine rule. They exist within realities fundamentally shaped by alien intelligences, pursuing goals that human minds can barely comprehend. Yet perhaps there's a strange comfort in this cosmic horror. If the gods are not omnipotent but merely vast, not omniscient but simply operating on scales we can't fully grasp, then their influence, while overwhelming, isn't absolute. Ranni kills her. 2 fingers. The merchant's collective suffering summoned a god. Marika shattered the Elden Ring itself. These acts of defiance, while they don't free anyone from cosmic influence, at least demonstrate that even gods can be surprised, opposed, and sometimes even defeated. The ongoing war between outer gods also means that no single cosmic horror can achieve total dominance. They check and balance each other through their eternal conflict, creating spaces where mortals can exercise some degree of choice, even if that choice is simply selecting which cosmic horror to serve. The very fact that the player can choose between different endings, different gods, different interpretations of reality, suggests that, while mortals may be pawns, they're pawns with the power to decide which hand moves them across the board. As we reach the conclusion of this journey through cosmic horror, it's worth considering what From Software is really telling us through the Outer Gods. These entities represent extremes: absolute order, complete chaos, total decay, endless blood, cold mystery. They're cautionary tales about what happens when any ideology or philosophy is taken to its absolute conclusion without regard for balance or compassion. The greater will's perfect order becomes tyranny. The frenzied flame's solution to suffering destroys everything worth saving. The Scarlet Rot's transformation leaves nothing of the original self. Each outer god offers a form of transcendence that's actually obliteration of everything that makes existence meaningful. The true tragedy of the lands between isn't that it's ruled by outer gods. It's that mortals have internalized their influence so completely that they can't imagine existence without divine mandate. The various factions and characters you encounter aren't just serving outer gods. They're true believers who've built entire worldviews around cosmic forces that view them as disposable. The Golden Order fundamentalists who hunt. Those who live in death genuinely believe they're serving divine justice. The Bloody Fingers who invade other worlds think they're honoring a mother who loves them. The servants of Rot see beauty in decay, meaning in dissolution. This is the ultimate horror. Not that cosmic gods are using mortals, but that mortals have learned to find meaning in being used. They've built cultures, religions, and philosophies around their own exploitation, finding purpose in serving forces that cannot and do not love them back. The few who recognize this truth, like Ronnie or Goldmask, are seen as heretics or madmen because they dare to suggest that maybe, just maybe, existence could function without cosmic oversight. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the cosmic horror lurking behind Elden Ring's beautiful facades. We've peeled back the golden veneer of the Erd-tree to reveal the writhing cosmic tentacles beneath, explored how every tragedy in the lands between connects back to alien gods playing incomprehensible games with mortal souls. If this exploration of gaming's most intricate cosmic horror has given you new perspective on your journey through the lands between, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support makes these investigations possible, and trust me, we've only scratched the surface of gaming's darkest mysteries. Until next time, fellow lore seekers, remember, in the lands between, even the gods are prisoners of forces beyond their control. And perhaps that's the most terrifying revelation of all.